I'm excited to welcome everyone to the first interview in our new From Lab to Literature series, brought to you by the American Society of Microbiology's Subcommittee for the Status of Women in Microbiology. I'm Michaela Gazdick-Stouffer. I'm a member of the subcommittee, and I'm an associate teaching professor in the Department of Biological Sciences at North Carolina State University. It's my pleasure to introduce and lead the interview today of Dr. Marlene Belfort, Distinguished Professor in the Departments of Biological Sciences and Biomedical Sciences at the State University of New York at Albany, and Senior Advisor of the RNA Institute. Dr. Belfort has had a remarkable 50-year research career focused on splicing, mobility, and evolution of self-splicing introns and inteins, work that was integral to identifying the first example of intron-containing prokaryotic genes. Her career has been recognized with membership in the U.S. National Academy of Sciences and fellowships in both the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the American Academy of Microbiology. She's a past recipient of the Alice C. Evans Award from the American Society of Microbiology and the International RNA Society's Lifetime Achievement Award. Dr. Belfort has recently published her memoir, Mommy, Can Boys Be Doctors? Can Boys Also Be Doctors? A Message to Young Scientists and Other Humans, which we're going to be discussing today. And on a personal note, Marlene was a key research scientist at SUNY when I was there earning my doctorate degree. So it's been really great to just reconnect with her through this project. So I'm going to have some questions to get our discussion started, but we're also going to be welcoming questions from the audience. So please feel free to add questions to the chat as we're going. Once it gets to the question and answer period, I'll start pulling some of those up. Feel free to add them as we go. So to begin, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Belfort to introduce herself and read a few of the passages from her book. So welcome, Marlene. Please let the audience know a little bit about yourself.
Hi, so thank you, Michaela. It's indeed a pleasure to be here today. If my voice sounds a little raspy, it's because I have bronchitis, but I'm getting over it, and I'm thrilled to be here today and talk to you a little bit about my career and my book. And so I thought I would start out with giving you some messages from the book, because these are really the motivation behind writing it. So the first piece I want to read is from the preface of the book. It says, "First, there's a message to young scientists, many of whom assume that a successful career starts with clear vision when they graduate college and progresses on a linear trajectory until eventually they succeed and are recognized for their work. Wrong. Many careers proceed in fits and starts, with interruptions, sidetracks, and delays. There can be a discomforting sense of just muddling through, which I actually consider an important process." So yes, muddling through. One gropes and is uncertain, and then eventually one sees the light and proceeds on. And I know when I had those feelings as a trainee, I would look at successful scientists and think, well, they don't have them. But yes, they do, and they do throughout their careers. So don't let that muddling through feeling get you down. The second message is on the mutually reinforcing roles of parenthood and a professional life. And I'll tell you in a bit about how the ASM informed my opinions on that topic. And the third message is that through the years, I've come to the happy realization that if one decides to have kids, that the very activities we catastrophize over and fear will damage our children often do the very opposite, building their resilience, their connections, and their connectedness with each other, because after all, they need to take care of each other. So those are the three main messages. I I'll now go to how ASM informed my thinking. So in 2002, when I was given the Alice Evans Award by ASM for my work mentoring young scientists and specifically women, I presented the award talk, which was entitled Molecular Microbiology, Motherhood and Mentoring. It was at the ASM annual meeting in Salt Lake City, Utah. The Committee on the Status of Women in Microbiology had invited me there to write up my views and experiences regarding the interplay between professional and domestic life, which I did in an article in ASM News. In that article, I addressed the sacrifices, the rewards of mothering and fathering while mentoring. I discussed the early hurdles, qualities needed to pull both off, and rewards that can be reaped from the effort. So that article actually got me thinking about the different um, attributes, if you will, that one needs in order to be a successful parent and a successful mentor. And they actually have a lot in common. One needs split second decision making. One needs to be a leader. One needs to be able to respond to crises. These are all things that one needs to do to run a successful lab and to be a successful parent. And then there are also these circumstances that kind of complement each other. So, like learning to take refuge at home when things are running badly in the lab. And likewise, when things are running badly at home, to go to the lab. I know I was asked many times how I raised three sons and ran a lab. What did I do when things really started to get very hairy at home? And I said, well, you know what? I said, sorry, I have to leave now. I have to go to the lab. So it was actually, again, one of those wonderful circumstances that make me think that life as a parent and as a scientist can reinforce each other. And it was those writings that I did for ASM more than 20 years ago that informed those opinions. And the last reading I plan on doing is from a chapter on my science. And the chapter is in, by the way, this is the book. I don't know if you can see it, but the chapter is entitled Looking Back at a Life in Basic Research, the Privilege and the Value. So it reads, I've enjoyed a privileged life indeed, following my passion in science and having my curiosity satisfied in so many ways. All my work has been based on the central dogma of molecular biology that, of course, all of you have heard, DNA, the gene, to RNA, the messenger, to proteins, the functional components of cells like enzymes and building blocks. Testing ideas and hunches is exciting. And although the breakthroughs come in spurts, interrupted by sometimes lengthy periods of frustration and setbacks, discoveries are supremely thrilling. I likened them previously in the book to finding love and giving birth. And better yet, this type of discovery-based research can sometimes result in useful, even life-saving practical applications, as I describe later in the chapter, and I would be happy to discuss with you. Layer onto that teaching and training aspiring young scientists, perhaps the greatest privilege of all. Imagine going to work each day and engaging with inquiring young minds, sharing ideas, motivating young colleagues to achieve their fullest potential, watching them grow and mature. And so that brings me to the end of my readings. And I just want to say that we have an example here in living color. I saw Michaela as a graduate student, of course, a successful graduate student, but at times floundering and then making it. And here she is today, some 20 years later, doing a Q&A with me on my book. What could possibly be more satisfying than that?
And I agree. It's been really fun from this side also, you know, looking back and the muddling through that you talk about in your book, looking back at those PhD years where there was definitely a lot of muddling through and
Yes.
wondering and frustration and thoughts of, is this really a spot for me? And how do you get to be what we saw you as in the department? This has been really fun coming full circle. So thank you for sharing all those passages. I think for folks on this webinar that haven't read the book yet, I think they gave a nice kind of snapshot of who you are and things that they could appreciate and get out of reading your book. Along those same lines, yeah,
Michaela, just if you wouldn't mind my interrupting you for a
no, go right
moment.
ahead.
I'm not sure were you going to tell registrants that they can actually purchase the book at a 25% discount?
Yes. Yep. So for anyone who is on the call, if you haven't gotten Marlene's book yet, and I was going to show it because I know, Marlene, you tried to show it, and I don't think it came across. It blended in too much with the purple of SUNY's colors. Uh, but this is Marlene's book that we're going to be talking about. And you should have gotten a link in the email after you registered for 25% off. That link is good through the end of the month. And so if you haven't gotten a chance to read it yet, and this kind of makes you interested in it, please do go ahead and pick that up. Marlene was very nice to give us the discount, and we really appreciate the little bit of money off, especially in these times. So with this book, one of the things I really like about it is the title. So I do think the title that you chose is very unique. It's pretty thought-provoking. The idea of mommy, can boys also be doctors, kind of spins the gender norm of how people think on its head a little bit. So I was wondering if you could just kind of share the story behind the title and how you came up with it.
Yeah. So of course, when I was being raised, and even up to about 30, 40 years ago, um, all the doctors were guys, right? Um, and it turns out that my three sons, one of whom is a doctor, married doctors. So my three daughters-in-law are all doctors, pediatricians, actually. And we were at a family event, and one of my grandsons, when my three daughters-in-law were standing together talking, said to his mother, "Mommy, can boys also be doctors?" So that just jumped out at me, and it said to me, if I ever write a book, that's got to be its title.
I love that that's a real quote from one of your grandsons. I think it's wonderful, and it says also a lot about how things have progressed for women in some of these STEM
Yes,
fields.
yes, absolutely.
So that's the front of the book has that interesting title. Along the back cover of the book, I thought it was really interesting that the words along the top of the book are immigrant, scholar, wife, scientist, mother, trailblazer, mentor, which I think beautifully highlights the kind of multiple identities that and kind of roles of your story, but also that a lot of people have in multiple identities in the story of their life. Were there times that you felt pressure to minimize one of those identities to succeed in another? And do you have kind of feedback for people that might be struggling to balance all of these responsibilities that exist in the different spheres of our lives?
Yeah. So, certainly, to answer your question, and then I'll go back to those words and really the the roles they play in my life. So certainly there were times when I need to put mothering on the back burner and just go all into my science. And there were times when a child became ill and I had to be a mom and not be at the lab for a seminar speaker whom I had originally hosted. So certainly there's a lot of juggling that's involved in these different roles. Um, I want to go back to the words. I wrote them down as you said them, immigrant. So I'm the child of immigrants. My parents were refugees from Germany to South Africa. And so being raised in an immigrant family had a profound effect on me. I think I felt very much other among these South African children, mainly girls. I went to an all-girls school for 12 years, which I think was influential too. Um, and feeling other was also a theme when I myself was an immigrant to the United States. And there were all these whippersnapper Americans who knew just the right phrases, who knew which way to turn the faucets, who knew how to flip chairs, those little desk things, right? So I didn't know any
Those
of
things are
that.
awful.
Yeah. So, yeah, even though I could speak English, the phraseology was different. So I felt other, and and so that then led to my needing to feel more comfortable with other, and eventually feeling other actually made me feel comfortable, made me feel like, oh, yeah, I mean, being on the fringe is a good place on which to be. One's contributions can be more unusual if one is a little bit other. So it's a kind of evolution of that um, immigrant mentality that I felt. Um, yeah, so I don't know if I've answered your question completely, but please feel free to go back.
I think you've answered it wonderfully. I actually really, where you say about being comfortable with being other, I think is kind of profound for a lot of people to probably hear. There's a lot of folks that, when they do feel other, try to figure out how can they conform? How do I not feel other? I think trying to switch that and say, what, being other's okay. Different perspectives, different viewpoints, different lived experiences bring different things to the conversation. And the more ideas we have coming to the conversation are really, yeah, they improve both science and everything else. So I really like that idea. Thanks for sharing those words.
So I just want to pick up on that again because about 20 years ago, I read a wonderful book by somebody called Elga Wasserman. Elga Wasserman um, was a professor at Yale, and she interviewed then 25 female members of the National Academy of Sciences. The name of the book is called Door in the Dream. It's not published anymore, but you can get secondhand versions. And and these 25 women had very different lives. Some of them started out as technicians in their husbands' labs and then evolved into the scientists they became. Um, Others came from abroad and developed their careers against great odds. But what all of these women had in common was a degree of comfort with being other, with being an individual. Because, of course, in those days, women weren't at the forefront of science the way they're becoming now. And so they needed to feel comfortable with their individuality. And so I do think it's a really important theme. I agree with you, Michaela.
Do you have thoughts or feedback for people that are trying to develop being comfortable with other? You said that you really felt other and you had to learn how to be comfortable with it. What was that process like for you? Do you have feedback for folks that are trying to do that?
Yeah. So, I think it's an evolution. I think one needs to come to recognize one's individuality and what an advantage that really is. And then just from reading, so I'm not sure I'll get the quote right, but Kurt Vonnegut spoke about being able to see further if one stands on the edge. And so this combination from this internal comfort and just reading widely um, the works of creative people like Vonnegut um, made me at peace with that.
Along some of these lines, but a little bit different, one of the things that you really write with candor about in your book is some of your challenges with mental health. And I know being focused in undergraduate education, we are seeing more and more mental health struggles in some of our students. Um, and this is one of those, it makes me feel old. One of my generation things is us Gen Xers, we didn't really talk about mental health. It wasn't like you didn't share your feelings necessarily. Um, and so I really think that people appreciate hearing that candor with mental health from others. I think that's one of the ways we can help people not feel other. So I'm curious, what made you decide to kind of share that vulnerability with your readers?
Yeah. So I think there were two main motivations. First of all, I should say that I was seriously depressed twice in my life. I was hospitalized twice. Um, I had treatment-resistant depression and needed to have shock therapy, also known as ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, twice. And I came out of it twice, thankfully. So why did I write about it? I think one reason was that just the one you mentioned, there was so much shame associated with mental illness. And I got the sense from the world in which I lived that I wasn't unusual. I think every family is struck by some form of mental health difficulty, from the extreme um, to just the moderate. And so I thought it would be helpful to those people to know that somebody who leads a successful life suffered from severe mental illness. And so I again thought that sharing that would be doing a service to my community. But I also did it for selfish reasons. My father killed himself when I was a 13-year-old girl. There was a huge amount of shame associated with that. It was a very, very terrible time of my life. And it took me a long time to shake the shame associated with that. And again, when I became depressed, which was actually in my early 50s for the first time, I became very ashamed. And I thought, I need to deal with this shame. And speaking about it was selfishly dealing with the shame. Coming out, talking about it, kind of removes that shame associated with hiding and not revealing. So those are the two reasons.
Well, thank you for being willing to, speak
And,
out. I think being able to do so is a good model for others.
yeah, and I have to say that I agree with you, Michaela. It's becoming more and more of an issue with our trainees. I do a resilience training with them once a year, our new graduate students. And I started that during the pandemic when the NIH recognized how difficult life was becoming for our trainees. And they offered a resilience training program and invited leaders of their training programs throughout the country to be trained as facilitators for a resilience training program. And I've done that ever since with our students, and it's very much valued. And yes, there is a lot of mental health struggle out there. And so the more we can talk about it, the better.
I think those types of trainings are really valuable. And I think training the trainers is also really valuable. That's one of those things that, especially us who are in academia, we become mentors and we take on that mentorship role. And a lot of us get a lot of value from that for our careers. But those aren't skills we learned in graduate school. And we didn't learn any of that stuff working on the doctorate. And so having training for us and for the trainers, I think is also a really important piece of this. So I'm glad you mentioned that. So we've got a number of questions that have come into the Q&A. I see our number is growing. So I'm going to switch a little bit. We'll take a look at some of those and see what some of the audience has. So let's switch gears to something that might be a little lighter, getting to talk about your children and your grandchildren. Joanna has a question in here about what were your children's and grandchildren's thoughts on their growing up years? Do you have a sense of kind of how they have experienced things from their view?
Yeah, yeah. So I actually interviewed them for the book, right?
Oh, that's
I
great.
said, how did my working 16-hour days while you were growing up influence you? Do you think that damaged you? And the answer from my youngest son was, Mom, that's pure bullshit. So clearly, I think that was the most straightforward answer. But also, they learned. I need to take a step back for just a moment and say that their dad was critical in making this work as well as it did. And also we had babysitters and nannies and neighbors and friends and the entire neighborhood pitched in. Um, yeah, so I think that the guys actually, so all boys, appreciated not having me there that much. I mean, I'm a control freak, right? So better that I not be there. And so I call that benign neglect. And another real advantage to accrue from the situation in retrospect is that now as adults, our three sons are each other's closest friends, and I can only assume that is because they needed to take care of each other as children and are continuing to do that as adults. So I think, as I mentioned in the preface, the very thing that one thinks is damaging one's children. I mean, I was extremely guilty for leaving them so much. Um, Actually has turned out to their advantage. So, to young parents, don't be so hard on yourselves. Just love them with all your heart, and the rest will take care of itself.
This other question is going to actually let you expand on a little bit of what you just touched on, too. Question that says they notice that successful academic women often have a spouse that has taken on more responsibilities. Could you talk about your experience with that a little bit? And then maybe how else could you find support systems?
Yeah. So, so my spouse is also a professor. He's a professor of chemical engineering at RPI. And so he was equally intensely engaged in his career, um, but like me, had some flexibility in schedule, right? So besides being there to teach a class, we could work from home even in the days before we had all of these electronic Zooms and other aids before even computers. But we could sit with pencil and paper at home and get our work done. So that was extremely helpful. And in general, he was an attentive dad. He loved to play with the kids. So that was good because I was all business, you know. I was about getting them clothed and fed, and so it was good to have one of us do the more playful stuff. I should say that for the first, I would say, 10 years, I forked over my entire salary for childcare, for nannies, for daycare centers. I just figured that I needed to do that in order to get my science done. And then eventually um, the kids were well taken care of, and slowly I earned a little bit more and could afford more than just childcare, and it all worked out well.
Great. So yeah, you needed that childcare to focus on the science. I want to talk about the science just a little bit. So your discovery of self-splicing introns in T4 phage really contradicted prevailing scientific dogma about kind of introns only existing in eukaryotes. And so I'm curious, can you tell us a little bit about that work? But really, did you encounter resistance or disbelief from the scientific community when you tried to share it, and how did you handle that?
Yeah. So, so this was a serendipitous discovery. It was at a time when it was thought that only eukaryotes had introns, and in a collaboration so I do a lot of genetics. learned biochemistry from a husband-wife team with whom I worked, the Maleys. So, and it was just at the days when sequencing on gels uh, was breaking. And so by genetics, it looked like there was an interruption in this gene that coded for an enzyme called thymidylate synthase. And so, I made deletions in the one direction, in the other direction, and then book came up with what looked like a desert. And then the DNA sequence indicated an interruption, and then the protein chemists sequenced the protein, and eventually the only conclusion we could come to was that there was this intron in a gene. And then we went on to show not only that it's an intron, but it's a self-splicing intron, like the one that had just been described a few years earlier by Tom Cech in Tetrahymena. So it was a group 1 intron spliced by the same pathway and so on. And this got me into the RNA field. But yes, initially, there was quite some disbelief. Excuse me. And in fact, several years after the discovery, there was an article, um, refuting introns in bacteria and phage. And my one son was a medical student. He was an MD, PhD student at the time, and he read this in Nature. So he wrote an indignant article to Nature to set the record straight. And the article was entitled, Mother Knows Best.
That's great.
Yeah.
So along lines a little bit with the science, but Mika asked in the chat if you think this book would be useful for undergraduates in biotechnology. So do you see this as something that could actually be incorporated into the classroom?
Yeah, so I don't know the answer to that question, and I'm just experimenting with that right now. So I um, I have the feeling it would be more useful for graduate students, but I'm just doing an experiment with a sorority who invited me to do an event for them. And I certainly think that some aspects of the book can be useful to undergraduates because from talking to them, they also have this imposter-like feeling. What are they doing there? They're surrounded by all of these smart people, and they just got there as a matter of luck and connection and so on. So yes, I think it could be useful, but exactly how useful, I think the jury's still out.
Following up with that, we've also got kind of a follow-on question to this thought about your science and how things might have felt. How did you manage if or when you felt kind of that knocked down or knocked out for using those brilliant ideas?
So very often when I felt knocked down or knocked out, like people contesting my ideas or papers being rejected or grants not being funded, I would go home and cook and hug my kids and cry. And yeah, and that would make me come back and feel like I could handle it. And yeah, so doing very simple things when the going got rough. folding laundry is my favorite activity at home. It's like, I get in touch with the people who live with me. I put things in piles and they don't move anywhere unless I put them some other place. So just these simple activities help me get my zen and yeah.
Find whatever those Zen things are.
Yeah, do them.
I don't mind folding the laundry. I hate putting it away. It will live on a pile for as long as it can.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so let's see. We had a question here, which is going to tie to actually what ASM will talk about right towards the end of this. But we had one question about your actual experience or process in self-publishing. So, kind of who reviewed your drafts, who provided editorial advice, and what was the publishing experience like for you?
Yes. So I didn't plan to self-publish, but I sent the book to three academic presses. SUNY University Press, I thought it's going to be a shoo-in, but let me give it a shot. They rejected it. Um, so I tried Princeton University Press because they have um, a woman in science series. They rejected it. And then I tried University of California because I was in graduate school there, and they rejected it too. And each one was like a mini proposal. They all asked for different things. And I felt, written the book, I feel exhausted with this process. I think I'm going to self-publish. So I spoke to a friend, and he said, this is a friend from childhood from South Africa. He said, my son works for a self-publishing company. He's an editor. So I'd interviewed some editors before that, and it was all like, will you fill out this form and that survey? And that's like, no. And so this young guy, Mark, I spoke to him and it was like falling in love. He got my number, he knew what it was about, and bottom line is he edited the book. And then it was published by the company for which he works, which is called Scribe Media, which is really very good. I was a bit afraid. I thought, I'm so used to publishing in high quality journals. They have such good systems in place. This is going to be hell. It wasn't hell. It was terrific. It was expensive. It was terrific. So the business model is totally different, right? If one publishes for a company, often one gets an advance. And this business model, one actually pays them for their help. And then the help stops when the book gets published. So marketing is something I've had no experience with, have no propensity for. So the marketing part of the book was horrible. So the bottom line is the experience of publishing the book was terrific. But if you expect to make money from your book, don't. Unless you're a marketing genius, it's going to be a money pit. So that's it. But if you want to get it out there, as I did, it can be a very satisfying experience.
Do you have any of your kids or grandkids who are big social media folks that you can
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
push the
yeah. So
marketing
they
onto
do
them?
it. They do it. They love it. They send it out there. And so social media, yeah, it turns out I'm now on LinkedIn and Instagram. I didn't know about any of that stuff beforehand, but I get all of the stuff coming in and then it's my grandkids who will say, "Oh, Nana, I hear you're doing something next Wednesday." So yeah, got to rope in your grandkids or children for yeah.
Let's see, we just had one more question that looks like it just came in. So this one's wanting to know if you had to move throughout your scientific career, and if you did, how'd you manage to do that with your family?
How did I manage to do that with a family?
Yeah, so did you have to move throughout your career for
Yes, I
different
did.
stages?
I did. So I had my first child when I was in graduate school in California, and then moved him to Jerusalem, Israel, where I did my postdoc and had two more children. So I have to say that that experience, aside from the move, which was horrible, was very good in terms of giving me the confidence to combine my career with a family, because Israel is a very family-oriented society. There are very good social networks, as in childcare, daycare. There is a whole cadre of caretakers, nannies, housekeepers, and in those days, in the early 70s, there weren't many models for working women, and all those women were working, right? So that kind of gave me the outline of what life could look like with a family and a scientific career. And then we moved back to the States, and I did a second postdoc at Northwestern in Chicago before we finally landed up in Albany, New York. And yeah, it was one of those things where I thought, here I am destroying my kids again by moving them from place to place and uprooting them, and they'll never be able to form social connections. And yeah, it turns out that each one of them is quite outgoing and, as I said, very connected to each other. And probably what I thought was a real catastrophe for them was actually building their resilience. So we shouldn't be as afraid as I was as a young mom and scientist to move and rely on one's kids to be accepting.
Well, Marlene, this has been great. In a few minutes, we're going to turn it over to ASM to talk a little bit about ASM Press and publishing for those of you who might be interested in writing your memoir or publishing a book. But before we do, are there any last words or comments or things you want to share, Marlene, before we turn it over to ASM?
Yeah, I say follow your passion. As a young girl, a young child, I remember at the age of 5, I realized I was alive, but my doll wasn't. So I proceeded to cut up my doll to see what she was made of. Um, and so from a very early age, I was kind of fascinated by life. And Cape Town, South Africa is a very beautiful place. So I was captivated by the vegetation, by the ocean, by plants, by cells, by what cells looked like. And I followed that passion for all of my life. You know, as an undergraduate at the University of Cape Town, I remember sitting at the microscope and looking at the cells of a leaf and wondering what was going on in those cells. And, you know, here I am at 80, having had a glimpse of that, and it's been an incredible privilege. So follow your passion.
Wonderful advice. I think it's a wonderful note to end on. And we really appreciate you taking the time to share all the thoughts and to write the book. I know that's a lot of work went into that.
Yeah.
But before we end the session, we are going to take a few minutes to turn this over to Judith from ASM Press to talk to folks about if you might want to publish. How could ASM help with that?
Thank you, Michaela, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. It's been so inspiring and fascinating listening to Marlene Belfort talk about the experience of being a scientist and a mother. But I've been invited to come and speak with you all about the publishing process with the press. We are the book division of ASM. I'd like to just open it with talking very briefly about our mission and goals, because that should be one thing that you consider when you are picking a publisher. I found it really interesting hearing Marlene talk about her experience self-publishing. We at ASM Press are here to support our members, the ASM members, and advance the microbial sciences. And what we do is publish print and digital books, and we do that with a mission 100% grounded in progress, impact, access, and accountability. We started in 1970. Our first book was Manual of Clinical Microbiology, which is now going into its 14th edition. And the goals of the press, really important thing to consider when you're picking a publisher or picking a self-publishing company, is we are a very small press. We deliberately are small. We sign 10 to 12 titles a year, no more. So we're very, very selective. And we do so because we want to ensure rigorous editorial standards. We want to make sure our authors or editors have personalized support and have the best publishing experience they can possibly have. In order to do that, you have to stay small. We are in the process right now of actively seeking ideas for books in these key areas that I've listed here, from environmental microbiology to bioinformatics to applied microbiology. But if your expertise is not in that area and you have a book idea, please bring it to us. There's a QR code here where you can go and put your information about your book, or you can email me or give me a call. I'm always happy to meet with people. It's my passion, my vocation to hear people's ideas for books. Next slide, please. So now down to what I'm here to talk about, which is the publishing process itself. We start off with, obviously, the submission of a book concept. And people usually get really nervous about this idea, thinking they need to send something very specific, very elaborate. Any quirky or off the wall idea you have is welcome. We're happy to hear it. We have no rigid rules about format. Again, you can send something more formal through the QR code, which is a link to our book proposal site, or just reach out to me and send a sentence or 3 paragraphs about your book idea. Once we get that together, I usually meet with people via Zoom and really start the process of getting to know you and your book idea. And I put together a book proposal with your input. I write it and then I send it to you to edit it. And what we're looking for in that book proposal is fleshing out or articulating the concept. And what we're looking for there is, what's the aim, objective of this book, if you will? How does it meet the needs of the microbial sciences or the ASM community? Why do we need this book now? Is now the time for this book, and why? Also, I help you identify the type of book that you want to write. Is it a reference book, of 1,000 pages? Or is it a textbook for undergraduates or graduate students? Or is it a techniques book? So I work with you on that, identifying who your target audience is and who the competitors of your book are, and then determining whether you want to be an editor or a co-editor or an author or co-author a book. So I work very closely with the prospective editor or author on putting that proposal together, share it with you to read through and approve, and then I take that proposal to our publishing partners at Wiley to have them review it and give me approval to undertake a full evaluation. And a full evaluation involves these four steps. First of all, we identify, and by we, I mean it can be me and you together, or where we identify 5 to 8 experts in the field that you would like to see the proposal as it is right now. And we share that with them. When we get the feedback from them, I share this with the prospective author or editor and expect at that time we work through it and decide what needs to be included, what we can let go, and update the proposal as necessary. And then while you're doing that, while you're updating after we have a conversation, I'm working on a sales projection analysis and estimating the predicted sales, what they will be for the first 3 years of the book's life, and then also making a suggestion about price. So then we take all of your updated proposal information from your reviews and my sales projections and predictions for sales over 3 years and the price of the book, and I take that back to Wiley. Go to the next slide. Thank you. So this is the time where I present the full evaluation, the final proposal to Wiley to have them review it. I present it to them. We have a lot of discussion about it. At this point, it almost never gets declined. It may get declined at other stages in the process, but I have a very close relationship with the publishing partners at Wiley, and at this point, I pretty much know if it's going to get approved. I request approval to draft a contract, which I then share with you, the prospective author or editor. Answer any questions. It can take weeks to get these questions answered, or it can take minutes, depending on how many questions you have. And then once we've agreed on the contract, I present it to Wiley. They review the contract and prepare it for your signature. And then you go into writing the book. And we have regular meetings. I stay with authors or editors throughout the entire process, which is about 2.5 to 3 years. So it's very personalized support the whole way through. And we, at this point, will tell you we would expect the book, the final manuscript, within about 12 to 18 months, and then it takes another 12 to 18 months to publish it. So it's a very long process, but it's a wonderful experience, which I have lots of quotes from our authors and editors on the experience of publishing with us. And that's the process. So if you do have questions or a book idea, I'd love to hear from you. And back to you, Michaela.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Judith. And I have a feeling that's information that a lot of us don't think about how do we actually become one of those authors on one of those books. So this was great. So thank you to everyone for attending today's interview. Thank you especially to Dr. Belfort for writing the book and for taking the time to share her thoughts with us today. Remember, for those of you who have not purchased her book, she did graciously share 25% off with us. If you go back to the email with the link to join today's webinar, you'll find the links there to actually purchase a copy of her book if you want to learn more. And our next interview in this series is going to be with Dr. Catalina Carrico, who was the 2023 co-recipient of the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for her groundbreaking work identifying nucleotide modifications, the suppressing immunogenicity of RNA. Her work laid the foundations for therapeutic uses of messenger RNA, most notably the COVID-19 messenger RNA vaccine. So in the interview, she's going to discuss her memoir, which is shown here on the screen, Breaking Through: My Life in the Sciences, which chronicles her perseverance, her curiosity, and her resilience as she journeyed from humble beginnings in Hungary to global recognition with her research. So you can scan the QR code on the slide to register there. That talk is going to be December 8th at 12 o'clock Eastern Time, and we hope to see everyone join us as we continue this new Lab to Literature series. So thanks again for joining, and thank you again to Marlene for taking the time and joining with us. I think this was great.